let's get started. I guess to also note that in terms of this briefing, it more or less follows the format of the report. The report itself is in the advanced briefing book. You can find it on our website under agenda item G2. So if you haven't read it already, you can do so and follow along. And in that regard, it's a bit of a mixture. So as during the committee meeting, it was structured around agenda items with a staff presentation and followed by committee discussion. And this sort of mixes a bit of what was in the staff presentations with what aspects of the resulting discussion. So as Merrick already indicated, the council created this committee of the whole last fall, and it is intended to address this issue. Well, it comes out of the council efficiencies discussion that started, I think, in the fall of 2022 and was on the agenda a couple times last year. And then that sort of merged with this emerging concern around budget. And so that's sort of the background for the creation of this committee. And as Merrick said, it's a way, it was an opportunity for council members to meet and discuss these issues in an informal format, not taking decisions. And as noted, any recommendations that emerged are presented to the council, and they have the option of formally adopting the report and the recommendations therein. That's what's expected to happen in April. And the meeting happened back in January, right in the middle of that ice storm here in Portland. It was a lot of fun getting to the meeting on ice skating rinks sidewalks. So the first part of the meeting was a presentation from Merrick, and which he touched on about, sort of where we stand on the council budget and so on. We're in good condition right now, but generally, just operational costs have increased. We all experienced that with a lot inflation being quite high over the last few years. It's coming down, fortunately, but that means everything is more expensive, and at the same time, the appropriations that the fishery management councils have received, that line item in the federal budget, has not kept a pace. So in real terms, our budget is, that base level of funding has actually shrunk. The council, historically over the last bunch of years, was able to kind of bank some surplus into a reserve spending account, sort of a rainy day fund. So we've been able to sustain our operations at the level that any of you that are, all of you, I think, that are either on the council or on advisory bodies have been experiencing. But that means we've been spending down this rainy day fund, and assuming that Congress doesn't get super generous in the future, this means that surplus is eventually going to be used up. And so really the effort here is to slow how quickly we draw down those funds, not crash land, make a soft landing at some lower base level of funding that we expect to be operating at in a few years. So that's kind of the big picture outlook and the framing for this exercise and the committee's considerations. So the next thing we talked about, the committee talked about, and we presented to them was this idea of categorizing what the council does into sort of what are their responsibilities and all the kinds of issues and things they take on. And so this resolved down to recognition that there are some core activities that councils undertake, and then, for want of a better word, they various kinds of things that are less part of that core, here term peripheral. And the white paper that was presented grouped these under these three sort of types of actions or terms. So at the core are the things that the council has statutory authority to do. In other words, what the Magnuson-Stevens Act says councils are and what they do, what their purpose are, what their responsibilities are, and so on. So that's termed things that where the council is proposing actions that are then implemented. And you know, as you're familiar, generally NIMS has limited discretion in terms of how departing from what the council puts forward for them to be implemented through the rulemaking process and so on. So that's clearly the core of council responsibility. The committee recognized, though, that there are some other things that really should also be considered in the core, and these are some other statutory mandates, principally the Endangered Species Act, the Marine Mammal Protection Act, because those statutes have actions that directly impact council-managed fisheries. Also, in some cases, the council has been involved in those processes. So, for example, some of you may remember there was a ESA consultation for salmon bycatch in the Pacific whiting fishery, and NIMS directly involved the council in the development of the biological opinion for that problem or issue of bycatch. And then also these, mainly the ESA, but also the MMPA, can require certain things to be implemented as a result of a consultation or a take reduction plan under the MMPA. So then the council is often the one who's responsible for figuring out or complying with that requirement to implement certain measures to deal with impacts to endangered species, marine mammals, and so on. And then also the committee recognized that there are these treaty obligations, that the council interacts closely with the Indian tribes that are involved in council managed fisheries. We have a seat on the council specifically to represent tribes, and so that relationship is an important part of the core responsibility. So then we get into these more non-core, more and more peripheral type of activities, and in the middle ground are things where the council has a strong advisory role. So, for example, with national marine sanctuaries, in the National Marine Sanctuary Act, in fact, there are certain things that when sanctuaries, for example, are getting into wanting to manage fisheries within sanctuaries, they need to work with the council on that. We've been doing that in some instances in the last couple of years. And then a number of stocks under council FMPs are transboundary stocks where there is an international management component. So the International Pacific Halibut Commission, the Pacific Salmon Commission, the Inter-American Tropical Tuna Commission. We have a couple of bilateral treaties with Canada for albacore and Pacific whiting. All of those things, the decision-making that occurs within these regional international bodies impacts council-managed fisheries and stocks. So we have an interest in what those bodies do. Exempted fishing permits, the council is very involved in making recommendations to NIMS and being a conduit for solicitation and review of proposals and so on. So that's gives you a flavor of that sort of middle ground. There's other things that you might be able to group in there, the ++ symbol there. And then there's further out from core responsibility, more where the council is really just in a commenting role. And this mainly has to do with a wide variety of activities that federal and perhaps sometimes state agencies are undertaking within the council management area. Obviously what springs to mind immediately is the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, leasing areas for wind energy development. The council's been very involved in that. And then if asked, the council may comment on legislation. So that's another example where it's really a more of a commenting role. And you can see there's these line of question marks because I think the committee was able to pretty well define that set of core responsibilities. But in terms of, I guess, prioritizing things beyond that, they struggled, couldn't really come to any definitive ranking of things. I think, basically an issue is always important to somebody, so it can be challenging to decide what is more important and what is less important. So we haven't gotten there yet. And then if we the next presentation and discussion was then linking that that kind of categorization of what the council does to our resources or our budget or our activities. So you can see there are a number of metrics that were used, the length of council meetings, the amount of staff involved. We rely on contractors for various things. So how much money goes out the door to contractors to help do the work, and then staff workload. I think also probably the sort of the level of staff professionalism there too, as you get into more demanding and wide-ranging and complex issues. You're going to expect more highly trained and experienced staff, and that has an implication in terms of cost. So this isn't intended to sort of be terribly specific, but it gives you an idea, and you can see those columns roughly correspond to that previous graphic in terms of sort of things on the left are more in the core area, and then as you move out, less part of that core area. And then the last column is just noting that we do receive supplemental funding of various kinds. Probably most salient right now that people have heard about is we're hoping to receive funding through some portion of the Inflation Reduction Act money that has been channeled to fishery management councils. And there are a variety of things that we have received funding for in the past through NIMS. We often refer to it as special project funding. So I think the point that's important to make is, although that can add to our budget, that money is, would be dedicated to a specific activity. And so it doesn't necessarily, those aren't always sort of part of the base or ongoing activities. They may be, but they may be something new. So it's not like that necessarily fully takes care of dealing with the activities that the council has been taking on. And then just generally, if we want to look at sort of that base budget, what our congressional appropriation is, and the dollars associated with that, where we would draw a line, you can see that it's really that core set of responsibilities that we talked about in the previous slide that is covered by the base budget, and the other stuff that we're doing is above the base budget. So there'll need to be some hard thinking and prioritization, obviously the supplemental funding feeds in there too, in terms of what types of activities it covers and so on, but just sort of a gut check about what we're faced with here in terms of needing to think about what the council can take on. And so then essentially, I think really more or less the last thing the council discussed was considering all of that, looking at council operations and aspects of council operations, and how can we change things both to be more efficient? That's been the ongoing discussion now for a year and a half almost, but also in relation or paired with efficiency is presumably some cost reduction. And you can see that a lot of these bullets talk about council meetings, and unsurprising, aside from staff, the costs of having a staff, that is the largest cost component of council operations, is running our meetings, council meetings, and bringing everybody to them. And the committee really at the outset, there's a sort of a soliloquy given on the importance of keeping in mind and ensuring that the council culture and values are not lost in any changes in how we do things. And I would say that essentially boils down to how we behave and how we treat each other, and how that contributes to effective decision making. So we don't want to jerk things around in a way that people can't work well and with each other and communicate civilly and effectively and so on. So that was a framing of the discussion. So in terms of thinking about council meetings, first off, location. So I think everybody's aware on the West Coast, the big metro areas like Seattle and the Bay Area and LA, probably San Diego, are expensive. It's getting harder and harder for us to afford to meet in those locations. We have other locations that are lower cost, like Fresno, but also Spokane, Boise, that we've held meetings. I would say probably the Portland area, metro area, sort of intermediate. We've, as many of you know and have been to, we've had meetings in Vancouver, across the river from Portland, Vancouver, Washington, a hotel there. So that's sort of probably intermediate. Anyways, so there's a consideration, and there are a whole bunch of other related factors like accessibility of the location and so on, in addition to the cost. And cost also is, just more expensive places mean the hotel rooms cost more. We pay more out in per diem to people coming to the meetings and so on, and in addition to any base costs associated with the venue itself. Next is duration of how long our council meetings. You saw in that last slide, if we retreated down to our core responsibilities, we could have probably fewer council meetings a day, and that obviously is a cost saving. Every day incurs the costs of paying people to be there. So that's another aspect of council meetings. Then format, we're all familiar. We were forced to go online and did that for 2 years, and found out that we could run council meetings online. We came back to in-person. I think everybody quickly realized the value of meeting in person to effectively get many kinds, if not most kinds, of work done. So there is definitely a trade-off, but obviously meeting online saves not an insubstantial amount of money, because you're not paying people to go somewhere. So that's another thing. Maybe one meeting a year could be online. And then next, the idea of you could conceivably think about what topics are on a particular council meeting and how you might group those. So for example, I guess you could group them according to, you know, the FMP. And in the first instance, that might mean bringing fewer advisory bodies to a particular meeting if not every issue is being touched on during that meeting. There is also some overlap with that meeting format because there may be some topics that are easily dispatched in an online format, others are not. I think everybody has recognized the importance of our salmon season setting process that we're going in the midst of right now, the importance of having an in-person component to that. There's a lot of negotiation and interaction between a diverse array of groups and people, and that in-person format is really important for that sort of thing. So again, you know, you could imagine maybe picking certain topics that the council can deal with better online and putting them all together in an online meeting. So various ideas there. Then composition of advisory bodies. I think this really resolves down to the size of advisory bodies. And obviously, in terms of all the issues already touched on in terms of, well, for subpanels, stipends, and then the costs of travel and so on. This may be a non-starter. I think it's probably everybody thinks all the seats on every advisory body are important. They represent particular sets of stakeholders. But anyways, we might as well throw it out there for consideration. Also, just a note, I think this was touched on in the staff paper for this, if not in the report itself, that the council, we're coming up on the end of the current 3-year term for most of our committees, and as part of the process for the council of soliciting and selecting members for the next 3-year term, the first thing, which will be coming up here at the June council meeting, is they have the opportunity to think about composition of advisory bodies. So that there might be a convergence here in terms of this question that relates to costs and efficiency, if you will, and that discussion in June. So it's there also as just a reminder that advisory bodies may want to weigh in with their views in June under the committee appointments agenda item. This isn't, strictly speaking, a cost consideration, but the more complicated and diverse, you know, set of issues that the council gets involved in and undertakes, that does increase advisory body workload, and you know, that just means both longer hours, more potential for burnout, more potential for having trouble finding people who are willing to suffer through demands of serving on an advisory body. So, you know, that's another aspect of, I suppose, efficiency and capacity that needs to be considered. Also, the committee discussed, you know, the effective communication of advice from advisory bodies to the council, and essentially how reports are presented to the council. One thing that came out was the desire that advisory bodies foreground their bottom line recommendations, bring that right up front, so it's clear the council also look for opportunities to summarize reports in various ways if possible. There is another dimension of this that there is in terms of when the reports are turned in. So, you know, obviously if they're turned in several days before the agenda item where the council will be considering the contents of the report, it's more realistic that council members will have a chance to read it. There'll be less demand to really go through it blow by blow to make sure that the council is able to absorb the content. So that's kind of another dimension there. And, you know, maybe there's some ideas that can come out in terms of the real feasibility and how advisory body meetings and so on are run to get reports out earlier. In a lot of cases, that's not possible, but anyways, something to think about. And then finally, we have defined comment periods, public comment periods. We have differential length. We have a longer comment time for members of an organization versus individuals. There's discussion generally about shortening public comment periods. Perhaps instead of having that differential, just have one comment period, whether or not you're representing a group of some kind. And generally, this probably have some marginal impact. Obviously, in highly controversial topics, public comment can take up a lot of time on the council floor, and that just adds to the overall demand of meeting time and so on and so forth. So some thought there. So then finally, that was kind of what the committee heard about and discussed, and then boiling down what they came up with recommendations. You can see there wasn't a real lot. They didn't really get into the specifics here, but as already suggested, they did have a pretty clear idea of what those core activities are, and then more trouble than prioritizing various kinds of topics outside of that core. There was a discussion around considering different things, that there is a trade-off between how much work is involved in coming up, completing that action, and the benefits it may have either to our environment or to our stakeholders and fishing communities. So I guess you could say how much bang for the buck is there. And so there may be something that is otherwise would be considered kind of a peripheral type of activity, but it is not a lot of effort on the part of the council in terms of agenda time and meetings and advisory body input, but has substantial benefits in one way or another. And so just not losing sight of that trade-off. They then asked the staff to develop some sort of tool that could be used to prioritize issues, and that would, ultimately could be used in some ways. So, this overall effort of getting to the scope of topics that council is going to undertake and matching that with how much the resources we have in our budget. And then finally, as I said, they didn't really come up with any specific recommendations on all of those questions around council operations, but they said it's important that we take a hard look at all of those things. So that's still maybe some tough decisions that'll be need to be made at some point down the road here, but at least through the committee discussion, that sort of teed that up, and I think effectively got council members really mulling over some of those questions and ways forward. So going from here, which is not now, but back in January, and already mentioned, there's the report. It's in the advanced briefing book. It'll be on the agenda at the April council meeting, at the end of the meeting on Wednesday and Thursday. And then, as Merrick already indicated, he's going to draft some recommendations, probably getting into a bit more detailed proposals of all those questions that look at our funding and workload, and how to sort of right-size things in that light, while not losing sight of the importance. The bottom line goal is that to continue that the council make good and effective decisions. And as Merrick indicated, he's aiming to get that out, a report out from him in June. I think that workload prioritization tool will take a first crack at it, present something to the council in June for consideration. It'll probably be a fairly drafty concept, maybe, we'll see. And then finally, again, Merrick already mentioned this. This is something that's not a next step now. It's water under the bridge, you could say. And I didn't touch on this in the presentation, but the committee did get a briefing on the proposals that staff developed and submitted. They were due at the end of January, and we're waiting to hear on the outcome of that. So there's not really much to say on that now, but just a note that that was something that the committee was presented to the council as a check-in before we submitted those proposals. So that's my presentation. So I guess I'll stop there and take any questions, and probably I'll likely defer to Merrick on most of them. But anyways, let's see if anybody has any. Let's start with any questions on the report and the presentation that I just gave on the report, and then we can move from there to more general questions. And reminder, raise your little blue hand. It's under reactions. You have to click on that on the bottom of your window. And okay, let's see. We have one hand up from Doug Fricky. So go ahead, Doug.
Yes, can you hear me, Kit?
Yep, loud and clear.
Yeah, just sort of start the ball rolling here. The things that for advisory panel members, well, everybody probably has some pretty strong ideas on how many representatives and what meetings they should miss and not miss and that kind of stuff is. Do you anticipate those kind of proposals will be coming from Mary here in April and we'll discuss them on June? Do I understand that right?
Well, I'm going to turn that over to Merrick since he's, as you said, you're asking about his recommendations.
Yeah, hi, Doug. So the plan now is I am, and I've been since this winter drafting a series of recommendations. Those recommendations will cover the questions that you just asked. I'll be bringing those recommendations forward at the June meeting, not here in April. And what we are tentatively planning is to have 2 meetings where we consider those recommendations. So I'm sure everyone here can appreciate just the way that our council works. It's very rare that we jump right into something and make a final decision. So we anticipate 2 meetings being necessary. So the first time the council and the advisory bodies will see those recommendations will be in June, and then depending on the extent of the feedback and the additional requests and how that discussion goes, we'll schedule the next one for September or November.
Just one real quick follow-up. Can we anticipate those recommendations being in the briefing book that we can review before the actual June meeting?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, Jessica Watson has her hand up, or did, before I accidentally took it down.
Thanks, Kit. No worries. Just to follow up on Doug's question, then, so what is an expectation then of recommendations that would be made for this April meeting? What types of recommendations is the council maybe looking for, in your opinions, Kit and Merrick, or recommendations, Merrick, that would be useful to you when drafting additional recommendations for this June report?
Yeah, that's a good question, Jessica, and I will, I guess, start my answer by saying this is a new thing for our council, this committee of the whole concept. So there's been quite a few questions around how this works. And to start to answer that question is, I think the best place to start is to say, the committee of the whole is a committee. And so the report and the recommendations developed in January are now going to the council, and the council is being asked to consider the committee of the whole's recommendations. So if there are any additional input from the advisory bodies that any advisory body members want to develop, I'd encourage you to focus on the committee of the whole's recommendations. They are not very detailed, and there was a lot of detailed discussion, but the most salient recommendations they made was, Merrick, tell us what we should do. So I think there's probably not a whole lot to do in April, and what we're doing here now is making sure everybody's informed.
Thanks for that.
Okay, I'm not seeing any more hands raised. We're making our lives pretty easy here. Yes, somebody can't find their blue hand, just shout out your question. Otherwise, I think we can wrap this up, but give it another couple minutes to see if there's any late breaking thoughts. Okay, well, thank you all for taking time out from late on a Friday afternoon, and actually one that is in the Pacific Northwest at least has turned into a nice day, unlike the last week or so. And hopefully the fact that there were so few questions means that we really have effectively addressed any questions you had, and not because you are mystified by what we're doing. Anyways, thanks all, and I think we can end this webinar now. Okay, bye all.
Thanks, Kit. Thanks, Merrick.
Thanks, everybody.